I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about The General.
Before we get started this week, I just want to make a quick shout out to our friends at Stay Till the Credits podcast. Join them as they talk about films ranging from Marvel, DC, to Star Wars, to absolutely everything else. They talk about filmmaking, theories, and all things film. So again, that's Stay Till the Credits podcast. Give them a listen. But this week, we're watching The General, or we watched The General rather. I got to pick this movie. This is one of my favorites. Buster Keaton, I think, is one of the great filmmakers of the 20th century, perhaps one of the most underwatched filmmakers of the 20th century. Andrew, could you give a description of The General?
Yeah, The General, 1926. Not his first feature, probably his most famous. I think Orson Welles said it's like his favorite comedy of all time. And it's a story where Buster Keaton plays a train engineer in the South. And he wants to, and Civil War has broken out, and he wants to be a soldier for the Confederacy, and win the heart of his lady. But he can't because he's a train engineer, and they're like, you'd be better just being a train engineer rather than a soldier. And his train gets stolen, and it kind of that kind of kicks off like the movie where he's trying to get his train back, but he's also trying to get his girlfriend back. And it's kind of like this train kind of action comedy movie.
So, Johnny Gray, he's an engineer. He has two loves in his life: The General, which is his train,
His train, yeah.
and his lovely lady friend. And he's back from a hard day's work, and he's done his train shit. And he goes home, and he talks to his lady friend. Of course, this is a silent film, so there's a couple of cue cards, but not a lot. And they find out that war has broken out, and of course, they live in the South. Which, if I have any complaints with the film, because I think it's a near perfect film, him fighting for the Confederacy isn't like my favorite thing in the world.
I think it was a deliberate choice made by him. I don't think he's like a Birth of the Nation guy, a Birth of a Nation guy or anything like that. I think Keaton was like totally chill and stuff like that. It doesn't really bother me. It's just whatever.
Yeah, it's not like a big plot point, and there's certainly no references to really anything about the Civil War other than like a couple of battles that take place. There's nothing about slavery or any of that shit. So yeah, I guess it's mostly just for comedic effect. I think if he fought for the North, there would have been a more tragic sense to it almost, where since as a Southern lieutenant or general or whatever, or as an engineer, he's kind of doomed from the beginning. So you can kind of just live with the moment.
It's kind of funny in retrospect. It's like, yeah, it's like, oh, Buster, they're making Buster Keaton the lieutenant of the Southern Army. It's like no wonder they lost, or
So war breaks out. Buster Keaton's lady friend is like, you gotta join the war because that's what all good men do. Like, that's the proper manly thing to do.
very manipulative of her to be like, you got to do this,
Or I won't love you. Like,
or
it's
I
a
won't love you. Yeah. Oh, okay.
pretty intense line to draw.
Like her brother is doing it, her father is doing it. It's like, well, you have to do it now.
You're a coward if you don't. So he's like, okay.
And he's not a coward at all. Like he's like, okay.
He's not a coward. He's the first one there.
The whole enlistment office scene is like really good. It's a really good gag to the whole set piece of him trying to enlist into the army is like very, very funny and very good.
I love it. I think one of the things that I love about Buster Keaton's work is that he's just willing to repeat the same joke like 7 times in a row, and they go on way longer than you feel like they should, but it works. Because the enlistment scene, he runs up there and he's like, I want to enlist. And they're like, okay. And then one guy walks over to another guy and they're like, oh, we can't enlist him. He's an engineer or whatever. And so they're just like, we can't enlist you. So then he's all sad. And then and then he like tests his like musculature and height and like looks at the other people, and then like he tries to get back in line, and he keeps trying to like trick them into giving it to him, but they just won't do it, man. They refuse.
He like tries every kind of outlay you possibly can to try to enlist in that moment. So it keeps on going and going and going until finally they throw him out.
Poor Buster Keaton.
Poor Buster Keaton. I know. He just wants to fight for the Confederacy. And like he comes out and then they're like, oh, he didn't even go into his like brother and his father are like, oh, he's like sucks, he's a coward, but like they want to let him in. And then his girlfriend is like, yeah, I don't want to see you again until like you're in a uniform or whatever. It's like, oh, okay. You get that iconic moment where he's sitting on the I don't know what they are, but it's like the wheel bar of like the train and it moves and he sits on top of it. And so he kind of like moves like up with it as the train's moving along, which is such a simple thing to do where he's just like basically just sitting down. Like he's not even moving around. But like I would be really scared if I sat there. Just because like it's a big train with like moving parts that could like crush your bones and arms and stuff and your feet. That's kind of the thing about Keaton. He does like the craziest shit like in his movies. Like he's just absolutely like insane. He's just so crazy. He just will do absolutely anything. He basically invented the idea of like putting your body on the line for like cinema
Yeah.
and like film. And in this movie, he does quite a bit. Of course, he does all of his like signature falling. Even when he just falls, it's like, damn, like you know, even when he just falls from like just the like he's just standing on the ground and he falls, it's like that can't like. Have you ever like fallen? When was the last time you just like maybe like slipped on ice and fell? You know what I mean? Like that sucks. So the fact that he does that so many times, it's like it's crazy. He's like brain is rewired.
Buster Keaton just doesn't give a shit. He'll do anything. He'll literally do anything for cinema. This man just again and again just quite literally puts his life on the line for his art, which is it's quite impressive.
Yeah, it's quite like I said, he's kind of well, I honestly I think he's like kind of like a proto action movie star, sort of. And this movie is like a proto action movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean if you've seen any of his other stuff, he has some I would say honestly, as far as stunts go, although I think The General is one of my favorite films of Buster Keaton, I think stunt wise, it's probably one of his more safer projects because he's had some pretty insane stunts. I mean, he's had like a whole house fall and he's like stands like right where a window is. Classic. Or like he jumps like from one building to another and falls. I mean, this guy does insane shit. So even, even though the stuff in this is insane itself, the fact that it's perhaps on the safer side than some of the other stuff he has done just shows how much Buster Keaton is just willing to to risk for the sake of making good film. So, good for you, Buster Keaton.
This is the only feature I've seen of Buster. I've seen a bunch of his shorts, a bunch of his two reelers. But this is probably his most expensive one, his most like cinematic feature, probably. They use a lot of trains, which is probably expensive, and they're like on the trains all the time, and they're running and they're acting and running around on the train. It just goes to a lot of different places. So yeah, it's got to be his like his biggest, most like expensive movie for sure.
Yeah, I think at the point of its release, it was the most expensive film ever made in 1926.
I watched the Peter Bogdanovich Buster Keaton a celebration documentary, which was pretty good. And they say that the shot, to spoil it, the shot at the end where the train falls off the bridge, I think Bogdanovich said it was the most expensive scene like ever shot in like silent film history. Which I mean, at that point, is the most expensive shot ever filmed. And it's literally it's just like a train. It's a crazy shot, like it's like an actual locomotive train going across a bridge and the bridge collapses and it falls.
No miniatures, no.
Yeah, no miniatures in this, like, which is insane. I mean, yeah, it's a very big movie relatively.
And Buster Keaton, or Johnny Gray, I should say, rather. It's been a year. He's been working on that train, and he's doing his shit, and he fumbles along his old lovely lady friend and her brother and father, right? Yeah, brother and father. One of them's not there because she's going to check on the other one, right? Or she's going to check on someone.
I think they're going to check on their father.
Yeah, they're going to check. So she's going to travel to somewhere. So she has to get on the train. And Buster Keaton's...
He's operating the train. Yeah, and they have to go to they're going to a train station. But at the train station that they're going to, that they're stopping at, it's revealed that from another scene where you hear the Union guys talking, that they're going to send a bunch of spies that'll infiltrate the Union, the Confederacy soldiers, like 10 people. They're going to take control of the train, which I think is Buster Keaton's train, right?
Yeah, it's the General. Yeah.
And then they're going to like take it from the south up to the north. And I think they want to destroy a bunch of like railroad infrastructure, right?
Yeah, like supply lines. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to destroy that stuff along the way. all the way up into the north. And then I think by the time they get to the north, they'll meet up with the general,
Hmm.
the like Union general, not the train.
Not the train.
Yeah, they get it. They get the train, and then Buster Keaton, he's on the case because he needs his train back. But also like he doesn't know until later that his girlfriend is on the train that they took as well.
Which is a great reveal later in the film. But they steal the train, and Buster Keaton freaks out, and so he gathers all these men, and he puts them on like the back part of the train, like a second car, and he jumps in the like engineering or the engine, and he zooms away, and it's not until like he's way out there that he realizes that he didn't bring along any of the other cars. So it's just him. It's him against these 10 Union men, and he just wants his train back, man.
I've seen that gag a couple different times, but it's always good when he's like about to like drive away or go or walk away or something like that. And you think that like something is connected to it, but in actuality, it isn't. Like that's a common gag and it's pretty good all the time. From that then on, you get kind of like this really great sequence. This movie, like you could really break it down to there's like the intro, there's one chase train scene. Then they have kind of this middle part where he meets his girlfriend and another part of the plan is revealed. And then you have kind of like the final train chase scene. And then it kind of caps it off with like a Civil War battle. That's pretty much how the film is broken down. But yeah, this first chase scene is very, very good because all it is Buster Keaton. But the Confederate general, the Union soldiers think that like there's a bunch of guys, but it's just Buster Keaton, Johnny Gray, racing after them, and just they keep putting up these elaborate traps and stuff, but through luck, basically, like he's able to avoid them all.
Yep, mostly through luck. He has this cannon that he keeps trying to fire.
Yeah, the cannon shit is good.
It's so great. He's like running back and forth from the engine to this cannon, which just makes me think how dangerous it must have been in like the 1800s or like the early 1900s to just drive a train in general. And he's just like running from this train, like there's no like walkway over this like pile of wood
Yeah,
to this cannon, and he's like filling it with gunpowder and all that shit. And of course, there's the gag where like the first time he fills it only up like a little bit, and it barely fires. And then of course, like the next time he puts the entire thing of gunpowder in it, and then it's like aimed towards him and all that shit. But he like luckily it's like right on a turn, so then it ends up shooting at the Union.
yeah, that's a good one. I like the one where he has to switch the tracks because he has like a cart in front of him, right? So he like that one is like kind of weird. It's like he switches the tracks because he wants to get rid of like this like cart that they dumped off to like slow him down. And so he's going straight, but he's going too slow. So it ends up like being like all the way in front of him, way far out. But they have like a bomb or something, or like some like I think it's something that like takes the train off the track, right?
They set wood on the they like set wood on the track, yeah.
And Buster probably wouldn't have seen that, so it like that trap is used on that empty cart, and Buster is able to, but he didn't like mean to do that. But yeah, it's just a lot of like really fun gags like that.
Obviously, Buster Keaton's often known as Stoneface for kind of his mild reactions to everything, but I love the way he reacts to when the train falls off, because of course it's one of those gags where like he's looking and like the thing's still there, and then he like goes to put some wood, and then when he looks back it's just gone. I love Buster Keaton's performance and this and a lot of stuff it is, because it's in one sense it's much more subtle, because I've watched a lot of silent films, and it's certainly much more subtle than films of the time, because when we're talking about silent film, they still use a lot of the techniques that they used in theater, which required a lot of kind of overacting in a lot of ways, right? A lot of big faces. And Buster Keaton was much more subtle in his movements, but I think it works perfectly in this.
He said he acts a lot with his eyes. Like he's really, really good at that. Like, yeah, he kind of has like, yeah, he's like the stone face kind of thing. He doesn't really smile, but he's such a good actor. Like he's just able to emote exactly what he needs to, like with kind of like his eyes, and he's just like really, really good at that.
But the Union people, they're dropping traps wherever they can. One of my favorite gags in this film is the one where they like start chopping down wood from like one of the places, and they're dropping it on the railroad track, and Buster Keaton like runs in front of his train, and then he starts like picking up wood. Very impressive.
Yeah, and then the train, like the gag is like it eventually catches up to him, right? And he like lays like on top of the front of the train. That's insane. I feel like just like a train like that can like suck you right up. You know what I mean? Like if it's like if you're not careful, like I feel like it can like take your foot or your leg or something and kind of like suck you underneath. It's not going like super fast, but I don't care. That would be scary.
It's a giant ass machine.
Yeah, he does not care at all. He completely he just does it, man. And it's just very, very cool. I'm trying to think of another gag from that whole sequence. There's a lot. Like we talked about the cannon, the cart, Keaton's movies, they have just everything that they need. They don't have anything extra or anything. It's pretty much all good, necessary shots and scenes and ideas. And
that one gag with the wood, right? Where the way the tracks work is you have to go like around this mountain. So like you're on top or you're like under this bridge and then you go like around this mountain and then you're on top of the hill. And so the bad guys are like trying to throw like wood on the tracks below them to like destroy his train. And he's like, right, he's almost run out of wood because he has to use wood to fuel it. And so he's like running his engine and he turns around and suddenly there's like all this wood in his cardigan as
they fail. Yeah. Yeah. I forgot about that. It looks like they actually like dropping it too. Yeah, insane stuff. You would never be able to do some of this stuff ever again.
No, you could not shoot this now.
Well, actually, I would say that like honestly, we talked about this last bonus episode, which by the way, if you want to listen to our bonus conversations, you can do that on Patreon. We talked about Jackass, and I honestly feel like, like Jackass is kind of like a little bit of a continuation of this kind of filmmaking of putting your body entirely on the line for the film. In fact, in the Peter Bogdanovich documentary, they have Johnny Knoxville from Jackass talk about how big of an influence Buster Keaton was on him. So I know you don't like Jackass, but it is a continuation of this idea of just putting like your body on the line for like the comedy, for the film, for it all. It's hard for me not to admire that 100%.
I certainly have my problems with Jackass, but I can't disagree with you. It certainly is in many ways a continuation of the work Buster Keaton did. So even though I personally dislike Jackass, I have a lot of respect for all the people involved in Jackass. Like that's, I would never do that. I could never do that. So I have a lot of respect for all the people involved in it, even though it's not my cup of tea necessarily. I have plenty of respect for Johnny Knoxville and the whole team for what they're willing to do for the sake of film.
Yeah, and same with Keaton. He's willing to do a lot as well. You have to admire it. He incidentally becomes his own spy, right? Like he becomes a Confederate spy. He like wanders into like I think a house and he tries to get some food, but it turns out it's where the generals meet. And I think they say like their thing is that they're going to, with a bunch of supplies, they're going to travel from the north back to the south, with a bunch of soldiers and a bunch of supplies. And I think they're going to stage like a surprise attack. So he knows this information and he's like, oh, I better tell them. And once again, incidentally, he also finds out that his girlfriend's there as well.
And so there's this gag where he's under the table and like people are kicking him and there's cigars being burnt through holes and all that kind of shit. And he just gets away. There's even one of my favorite moments is they lift up the tablecloth and you can like see his face. Like the lighting's really nice here because like you can see him very well, and you think they're gonna like look under and see him, but of course no one sees him.
Yeah, I don't know how they do that. I don't know how they not see it. It's a whole man. I mean, like Buster Keaton, he's like a small guy, but like, but yeah, I guess they didn't see him. That's fine.
So they go off. He sneaks out of the room. He gets out of the house. He goes to the window and climbs into the room where his lady friend is, and he realizes that the only way to wake her up is to put his hand over her mouth, which makes sense because she's gonna freak out. And so he wakes her up. Of course she freaks out at first because he's stolen a unit, which of course becomes like a repeating gag throughout it, is that he's wearing a Union uniform. And he gets her they get out of the house and they're like caught in the rain. And in the first time I watched this whole scene, the coloration of this whole scene is blue. Like they put like a blue tint on it. I don't know if that's in the original version or not. It's kind of hard to tell because I've seen every time I've watched this movie, I've seen a different version. So I've seen it 3 times and I've seen 3 different versions. And they don't have any consistent like music either, which is weird. So when I watched it this time, the music was it was like this synth kind of deal, which was very it was a very surreal experience. Like it's usually when I watch it, it's usually like a classic kind of like old school organ or something.
I love silent movies, but like whenever you watch them on YouTube or whatever, they always just have like kind of the same old timey piano soundtrack and score, which kind of grates after a while. It's like, okay, we get it. It's like an old timey movie, so you got to play like the old timey music or whatever that they would have played at the fucking theater. Sometimes I wish though that wasn't the case. It's just like you could only watch so many of these movies where you're just kind of like, I'm gonna blow my brains out if I hear another old timey piano score.
The version I saw this time, the synth was extremely dramatic, and
That's cool though. That's different at least.
it was very different. It put like this very serious tone under it at points, which created this weird juxtaposition, which made me enjoy it even more, especially because we're listening to like a synth, so it's already this weird juxtaposition, kind of this 80s sort of sound mixed with these 1920s kind of filmmaking techniques. I don't know if I'd watch that version again because it was weird and strange, but it was definitely an interesting experience. I imagine yours then was a kind of old timey piano kind of thing going on.
I think it was an old timey piano the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wish I don't understand why they can't just like there isn't just some sort of music sheet or something because it's like that with all these old silent films is like there's no like standard for like music. And I understand that like when they made these films they would often like you would go to the theater and there'd be like a live piano person and he'd like play his shit or whatever while it went on. But I kind of wish they would standardize it somehow so you could have the same because I mean it's not like a huge deal in these films, but it does create a different experience when you hear these kind of different sounds. So I kind of wish there was some sort of standardized way of doing it. But
The version that I watched on YouTube, it says in the title of the YouTube video, original piano score by William P. Perry. I don't know if that means like it's like the original piano score that was made when the movie came out, or if it's like an original piano score made by some guy today. I don't know, but I'm guessing it's like maybe the original piano score that was like intended for the movie when it originally came out. So I guess if it's the original, that's fine. Like it's okay. It was what was originally intended, but it's still like an old time piano score. It's like okay.
but they escape the house and they're out in the dark. It's raining. They're like, it's too dark. We can't do anything tonight. We'll stay here tonight.
Well, they get the bear trap, which is crazy.
Oh yeah,
That would hurt really bad. That would probably like break your like ankle or your hand if you actually.
it most certainly would.
But they're okay. I mean, they're hurt. They hurt, but like I don't think they break anything.
No, whatever they were using wasn't like a real bear trap. Because that would have like snapped bone. Like that would have definitely been extraordinarily painful.
That gag is also kind of like another thing that Buster does, where it's like something is stuck to him, or he's trying to get rid of something, but like he can't get it off. And as he tries to get it off, like it makes everything worse. Like it makes the situation even more sticky or difficult or whatever. So that's another kind of common Buster gag. That's a lot of fun to watch.
It takes him a long time, but he gets it off. It takes him like 6 tries. It's like on his arm, it's on his leg, it's all over the place. But he finally gets it off, and they decide to hold each other close that night as night turns to day, and they fall asleep. And when they wake up, they realize that they are basically on the outskirts of a giant Union camp.
And they find the train.
And so they put her in basically a potato sack is best way to describe it. It had like shoes in it.
That gag's good, yeah.
It's amazing how she just fits in there. Like she scrunches her way into this little potato sack, and he's like trying on shoes and shit. And he picks up this potato sack, and there's like all these men. They're like throwing their potato sacks onto this train or whatever, the general. And of course he like walks by because he doesn't want to throw her like in with all of these utilities or whatever. But there's like a general or someone there. He's like, no, you gotta throw it in there. So he throws her in there, and then just like men just start throwing like heavy shit like right on top of her. And you see his like face of like total despair. It's great.
Well, while she's in the sack, they also do the thing where they unhook. They take the hook out of the train so that they can just get on the train and drive away, and they won't have to take any of the load.
I love just how ballsy he is at this moment. He just jumps onto the engine, he knocks a guy out, he pushed another guy away, and he's just off with him and his train. So the Union team, like that originally stole his train, goes after him. And then behind them is this like giant supply train that's supposed to supply.
And that's the second train sequence. It's kind of switched now. So they're trying to be stopped by the Union as they go into the South. And of course, with luck, they're able to thwart many setbacks that the Union might do. Although they give a lot of setbacks to the Union, they throw stuff on the track. They bend the track at one point, which really sets them back a while. They light a bridge on fire, which is what results in the train falling and the bridge and the scene that we mentioned earlier. That one's really fun. Like I said, each train sequence, crazy, looks great. They work these trains like they're toys or something. Like it's incredible.
Yeah, one of my favorite gags in this second part is there's this Union general who is knocked out and he's like on the engine. And so every time he wakes up, something just ends up hit, like either like a piece of wood hits him or like someone knocks into him. And so the recurring gag for the rest of the film is this poor man is just trying to wake up, and every time he wakes up, he's knocked unconscious either by the lady friend or Johnny Gray, Buster Keaton, or someone else. I love it.
The movie is like filled with gags, but everything like pays off really well too. So everything that's supposed to pay off like character and plot wise, it pays off. Everything is set up and paid off like really, really well, including the general on the train.
Yeah, I will say, of all the silent movies I've seen, I think Buster Keaton is probably one of the best silent filmmakers at creating jokes that work from beginning to the end. Because with a lot of silent films, they're really great at making short films and having these like little one-off gags, but often when you're watching a silent feature, it kind of just feels like a lot of short films, like a lot of short gags, and they don't often connect very well. But I think that's something Buster Keaton was always very good at, is his ability to connect kind of gags at the very beginning and kind of repeat these gags all the way through, and the way these different characters kind of interact with each other, and just the way Johnny Gray or Buster Keaton acts in the film. It just feels very him. Like he's just always kind of fumbling into the right situation, which I think is perfect.
He's a pretty good hero. I mean, he's a pretty good like movie hero. I mean, he's up there with any one of like an action movie star. He's a small man. You know what I mean? But I think he's ultimately pretty cool, even if he does like make a lot of mistakes in like a lot of like comedic fumbling and bumbling. I don't think like Buster Keaton like makes him or his character ever look too stupid.
Yeah, I think he walks like a really fine line between being naive but not necessarily being stupid at any one point. Like he feels like a character that's trying his best, even if he's a little silly at times. He doesn't feel like idiotic or stupid by any means. So they're going to the South. They pull off all these different gags to try to slow down the Union. A bunch of great gags, really well thought out. They certainly parallel, as you're kind of saying, this second train scene kind of parallels the first train scene. There's one of my favorite gags in this is they stop because they have to collect wood, and so they grab like wood from like a fence or something. And so he throws the first wood up there, and then when he throws the second one up there, it like knocks the first one down. And then the more wood he throws up there, just like the more wood that falls down.
He's really throwing it up there.
He's really throwing that shit up there, and it's all falling down. Poor Buster Keaton, poor Johnny Gray.
He throws one and it like ends up on the other side, which is crazy. You can see it. Like he filmed it perfectly.
It's great. It's just like this really wide shot, and he clearly had to sit down and kind of think about where he was going to throw it and how he was going to throw it. And it's perfect.
Yeah, he's a master. I mean, he really is.
And his lady friend sets up this trap, tying like string to trees or something along those lines. And she gets onto the engine, and then she just leaves, like thinking Buster Keaton's there, which he's definitely not. And so he runs what is basically like a cliff, like basically just like a sheer drop. And Buster Keaton just like drops down this cliff. Very impressive. Just another incredibly risky move for like just this little gag. And he drops down this cliff, and right as he gets to the bottom of the cliff, her like train's coming towards him, and she notices that he's not on it, so then she backs up, and then he has to climb back up the cliff. And then of course at that point he jumps on and they're off. But by all that like time, the Union people have caught up. They're right on their track. They're right on their tail.
And I think he's able to eventually get up again to like the bridge, right? That looks like he actually like fucked around with like fire, right? Like I don't think there's any trickery. Because yeah, like the thing is like they're gonna torch the bridge. And it really looks like he's like jumping or is like surrounded by flames. That one kind of like made me gasp when he jumps, when he's on the bridge and there's like a fire in front of him and he wants to jump over and he jumps, but he ends up jumping right in a hole that's in the bridge that goes into the water. And like I gasped when I saw that. His I don't know if his gags make me laugh, but I think they do make me laugh sometimes, but I think they make me gasp and like exclaim more than they make me laugh because they're so crazy. Like when he jumps. Oh, that's crazy. I was like, oh my God. You really fell. That's just wow.
Incredible. Terrifying and incredible all at the same time.
Yeah, I love that shit. It's so good. And I think after the bridge, she's able to get into town, right? And tell everyone what's going on.
He gets into town, and they kind of, him and his lady friend tell everyone what's going on. And there's just this really long gag of like soldiers running through the street and him kind of being like trapped, which looks, again, extremely dangerous because there's dozens of horses and men just like plowing down the street, and he's like like he's in the middle of all this. And of course, every time he tries to cross the street, just like more men and people just like end up coming across, and it just goes on and on. And they come in like spurts.
Yeah, it really looks like he's going to get hit or something. You wouldn't be surprised if he did.
But he gets across and he's like, look, the Union, they're coming. Let's go. Let's do this. So like, all right. So they all go to this river where the bridge is burned. Oh, they do that famous train scene.
Of course, yeah. Because they're like, you can go over it. It's fine.
I love that.
And just incredible scene.
They get a train and they just literally destroy it by putting it on.
Did you just destroy a whole train? I guess if you have the money to do it, you can just do it.
I wonder what that conversation was like. Like Buster Keaton when he went to the production studio and he was like, hey, I want to destroy a whole train. That's just what I want to do.
They're probably just like, well, make us money.
Probably. I mean, at that time, by that point, Buster Keaton's one of the most famous actors alive. So the general is basically his opportunity to kind of make whatever he wants. So I guess if he says he wants to destroy an entire train, they destroy an entire train.
Right. That's kind of the tragedy of Buster, right? Like in the documentary, they talk about this, and you've talked about this, where it's like throughout the whole 20s, Buster is completely independent and he can make whatever he wants, however expensive he wants to make it. And he makes all of his masterpieces in the 20s, like all of his short films, Sherlock Jr., which is I think my favorite. 1 Week, another favorite. This movie, all of his features and stuff. Through the advice of a family friend who was a producer, he signs to MGM. And then, of course, like he says, that was the biggest mistake of my life because he basically gave up all of his independence, because he gets kind of caught up in the studio system where he can't like do as much. Like he doesn't have enough power, even though he's like he's a master, he's Buster Keaton. But he doesn't know how to work his way in the studio system because it's like, it sucks. So he's not able to get anything off the ground, and everything that he ends up making and sucks. He can't really direct anymore. Like he pretty much doesn't really direct movies from that point on anymore. And I think he just kind of ends up being a consultant for a while. He was an alcoholic, and his first marriage ended. Like he was having a hard time.
Yeah, he went deaf during this time, and it's one of, I think the greatest tragedies of cinema, it's very similar to the story of Orson Welles in the Lost Sense, is something people often don't realize about early filmmaking when we're talking about the 1910s, the 1920s, going into the 1930s, but probably ends by the 1930s, is film at this time was extremely independent. And the way Buster Keaton got his start is his friend just owned this camera because to shoot a film,
Fatty Arbuckle.
yeah, Fatty Arbuckle, because to shoot a film at this time really wasn't. I mean, it's in many ways it's similar to the landscape of shooting a film today. You could do it for very cheap. All you needed was a camera, and you needed a man to spin the little thing and some reel. It wasn't expensive. Anyone could do it. Studios really weren't kind of in the game yet, and Buster Keaton was top of the game as he would be considered today like a small independent filmmaker. And he's an independent filmmaker who can then go in and make these really big films like The General and just kind of do his own shit. But when the studio system comes into effect, I think this is the big difference between Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton is Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, of course, both kind of got their start in early silent filmmaking, but Buster Keaton was perhaps the epitome of independent filmmaking, where Charlie Chaplin was perhaps the epitome of studio filmmaking. From the very beginning, that's how Charlie Chaplin kind of worked the system. So he always knew how to work the system. So when he wanted to make his films, he knew how to play the game, where Buster Keaton didn't know how to play the game. And because of that, it kind of led to his demise in the same way Orson Welles was never really able to play the kind of studio system game. And so you have these really architects of cinema just thrown to the wayside because the studio doesn't believe that they can make enough money.
Yeah, and also like sound, you have sound coming in and kind of messing with everything as well. And like, yeah, I think the documentary said that Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd like told Buster like you shouldn't do that. Like you shouldn't sign to MGM. You shouldn't sign your soul to them. Um, but he trusted the guy and he did it. And yeah, like we said, like it was a huge mistake. They completely misused him, didn't utilize him in any way at all. Yeah, and he kind of fell by the wayside for a long time. I think in his later life, from the documentary, it seemed like in his later life he really sort of had a second wind a little bit, kind of like a Miles Davis kind of second wind kind of thing, where he people like appreciate him a lot more, like a lot more, and he's like getting great awards and he's appearing in commercials and on television shows and stuff like that. And he's doing a little bit more, not directing, but he's appearing in a lot more uh, films and other stuff like that that are more his speed, that are more appropriate for him, and that's good.
You did it, Buster Keaton. He had a pretty hard spell in the middle, but towards the end, he got the recognition that he always deserved. And, there is that. You, of course, wish that Buster Keaton had the opportunity to make a lot more films. I mean, just imagine the kind of films he could have made if he was given the time and the energy and the money to do. I mean, look at Charlie Chaplin and all the great films he made in both sound and silent. It's disappointing, but he still made The General. So,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, these 20 movies are still around and they're still great. Speaking of The General, so you now have like basically the final battle scene. It looks great, It looks like a Civil War battle scene that you might see in any movie.
yeah, there are so many moving parts at this point. There's men on every side. There's all these different things going on. And I love how Buster Keaton, he has this gag with this sword, which he just can't seem to figure out how to use. And so the father of his lady friend is like this big general person, and he's like pointing all these things. And so Buster Keaton's basically mimicking the moves, but every time he tries to move his sword, the handle comes apart from the rest of the sword, and so he has to keep grabbing it. And he ends up going because he sees like this sniper who's starting to kill people. And so he goes over to these people shooting a cannon, and they're just picked off one by one. And Buster Keaton is like trying to explain like what's going on. He keeps pointing at them, and every time he points at the sniper, one of them like dies. And of course, Buster Keaton just kind of moves his sword again, trying to point it at something. And at that point, he just like gives up. He's like, I'm done. But then, of course, we move to the reveal that the sword kills the sniper. Like, again, just fumbles into the perfect situation.
That one's a nice little gag. He killed a man, accidentally, but he still won. Yeah, I think like what that scene is kind of concluded. They defeat the Union soldiers. They're in a tough position and they don't really have the high ground, and then it's back in town, and the Union general who's knocked out, that pays off because he wakes up and he shows up. He goes to the one Union general, the Confederate general, and he gives him his sword, as a, so that pays off very nicely, to that they've been defeated in this battle. And at this point, too, Buster's is like, he's wearing a Confederate uniform, and the Confederate general is like, is this your uniform? And he's like, no, it's not. He's like, well, take it off. And he takes it off, and he's like, oh, like kind of in a sad kind of way, because he's like, oh, I'm in trouble, aren't I? They give him like the cowboy lieutenant like hat and uniform instead.
And Buster Keaton's happy. He has his lady friend back because now he's in uniform. He's done it all. He saved the day. The South wins the Civil War, and everyone's happy.
Yeah, the South wins the Civil War. Yeah, no wonder they lost. They had Buster Keaton as the lieutenant of the Confederate Army. That's how the movie ends, and it, all the movies, some of them don't. In Cops, like at the end of it, he dies.
Yeah,
which is kind of weird. But most of them end with him like with his lady friend, and they did it. So yeah, typical kind of Buster ending as far as I can tell, but it's a nice one.
All right, Andrew. Final thoughts and rating?
Great movie. Just sick, kind of early action, silent movie. I like movies that have trains in them, so this one's good. This is a good train movie. Just like good, funny, clever, well set up gags. Buster's awesome. He's like the ideal movie protagonist in movies like these. Yeah, it's really kind of hard to like say very much about them, because they're just like really well-oiled machines that are just, they don't really have anything like that you don't really need for the most part. And yeah, like the gags don't necessarily make me like laugh out loud, but they do like get a reaction out of me for sure, because they're just insane shit. Him falling, him running around and crawling around on the trains, like it's very impressive and fun. And yeah, it's a good movie. 8 out of 10.
I reciprocate a lot of those same feelings. I love Buster Keaton. He was the first silent film star I ever saw. It was the first silent film I ever saw was Cops, I think. And I have this nostalgia for Buster Keaton because I used to watch it when I was a kid, because like my great grandma would watch all the time, and that's what I would do when I was there. And I think The General is as near to perfect as a silent film can be. I think all of the stunts are incredible. The story is great. Buster Keaton just gives the performance of a lifetime again and again. He's doing stunts that just are absolutely absurd in every sense of the word. And I love it. And I really have nothing bad to say about it. I do wonder, having heard so many different versions of the soundtrack, I don't know what the original soundtrack is. I'm sure it's just an old-timey piano thing.
It's just an old-timey piano thing. That's it.
So,
that's all.
But I love it. I love this film. I love watching it. I've watched it a ton of times, and I'll probably continue to watch it because I just feel happy watching it. So I'm gonna give this film a solid 9 out of 10.
I think my favorite is Sherlock Jr. that I've seen so far. I like that one a lot.
It's pretty great. I like that one a lot too.
That one I think might be my favorite.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. You can find me at AustinLuca12.
Find me on Twitter at ADHarp24. I'm also on Letterboxd at RetroAndrew, RETR0 Andrew.
Next week, we will be watching Reanimator. This was Andrew's choice. Andrew, why did you choose this movie for next week's viewing?
I like picking horror movies for the show. They're fun to watch, and you haven't seen too many of them. And that's one of my favorites. Great comedic 80s horror movie. It's a lot of fun.
Great. So tune in next week for our watch of Reanimator. And thank you to our wonderful editor who edits all our podcasts, Shannon Mitchell. She does really the work no one else can do. Really an incredible job every single week. And you can find this podcast wherever you hear podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at With Nothing to Say Podcast. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.